Now, you've studied human rights, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, my area of expertise is Chinese philosophy, in particular early Confucianism. And I did spend some time in China on exchange, not all that long. I spent more time in Japan, actually. But the Chinese take on, and there is this what's called the East Asian challenge to human rights, where, and it's largely coming from a Confucian perspective, where they don't really want to talk in terms of rights. I mean, they have their own language, moral language, and rights isn't part of it. It's a concept that was developed in the West. So they, but they're willing, under pressure, to go ahead and express their concerns in terms of rights, because that's what's being forced on them in terms of this is how you're going to have to engage the debate, because these are the terms that we're using. So the Chinese response is, okay, as you said, but we have what are the rights? We have a right to have our bellies full, or at least have enough to eat, that kind of thing. Education, healthcare. These are what are called second-generation rights or positive rights, rights that require somebody to do some positive action towards you. In America, in particular, there's been this sort of libertarian emphasis on negative rights, and some people have liked to argue that only negative rights are really rights. And by negative rights, a negative right is really the right to be left alone, the right not to be interfered with. So the right to free speech is really the right not to have somebody interfere with your ability to speak. And the Chinese view is that, you also have to include these positive rights. They're just as important. That the right to free speech, isn't worth much if you're starving, right? And so they argue that you have to balance these. And how they get balanced are going to depend in part on the particulars of the situation. So in a developing country, it may be that more draconian policies that are necessary for, I mean, you can argue whether or not they're really necessary or not, but this is the argument, that policies that restrict free speech more than we would like are necessary for stability that is necessary to provide for everybody. So, and we can argue the empirical part of this. People say, well, how many people have been saved from starvation by imprisoning somebody for free speech? And so I'm not, I certainly don't want to be like a defender of Chinese oppression or anything. But I think they do have a philosophical point that needs to be, taken seriously. That, and what's underlying this is a view, I think, that they suspect that we, by taking this, emphasizing negative rights, and thereby sort of putting an emphasis on property rights in particular above rights that would require people to give of their property, right? Because if you have a right to health care and you have a right to quality education and so on, somebody's got to pay for that, right? And so they're going to have to use their property or what is in effect their property to do that. So there's this conflict between negative rights and positive rights, and I think that they have a point that it's First of all, we can go further into the philosophy here. I mean, is there, what's underlying these rights? Is there a metaphysics here, a metaphysics of morals, that these rights, the negative rights, are a part of the moral landscape or something? And in China, in particular, they don't tend to be metaphysical in this way. They tend to be much more practical, and to the degree that rights language seems to sort of be absolutist and not sensitive to conditions and coming from this kind of metaphysical presuppositions that they don't accept, they are resisting that.
You were a student in China, in Peking, right?
Well, I was an exchange student. I wasn't taking classes. I was basically doing research. I was just there for 1 month during the summer. And I've been there several times for travel and conferences and so on. I'm going back next month.
So when you were there, walking around the streets in Peking, did it appear to you that people didn't have human rights, or that were people...
Yeah, it's so interesting. I have mixed feelings about this, because on the one hand, I think there's a lot that isn't fair and right in China. Certainly like Tibet. I mean, I think they're totally... I oppose what they did in Tibet, obviously.
But you were never in Tibet, so you have no personal
knowledge.
knowledge.
No, that's true. I don't. That's true. I don't. But the take there seems to be, even with Mao, at the time that I was there, it seemed like there was sort of almost an official stance. When I say official, I don't mean it's imposed, but it just seemed like the standard response of something like 70-30, like 70% of what Mao did was right and 30% was a mistake. But nobody's saying Mao is a bad guy. And there's, certainly there are rights advocates. You can't in China, you can't say that everybody's on exactly the same page. But take, for example, the Tiananmen Square thing. We like to think about this as like a democracy movement. But they had a very, it wasn't, their understanding of democracy is not our understanding of democracy. That protest was not to, so that there would be voting rights for the masses. It was for there to be certain privileges for the intellectual class, which they aspired to be part of. So academic freedom, those kinds of things.
It's like freedom here in America. What does freedom in America mean? It means that the rich are free to make wage slaves out of everybody else. Is that a human right? Where are human rights?
Yeah, yeah.